17-year veteran of the FBI in the Washington field office, John Sullivan. John, thank you so much for taking the time.
Ryan, thank you so much for having me.
Now, importantly, you had just announced on Friday that you had left the FBI, that you resigned after, again, almost 2 decades of service there. Why was it important to leave the FBI just this past week?
Yeah, it's was not something that the decision I made lightly, but I'm really worried about what I'm seeing happening inside of the FBI right now, and I feel like the American public need to understand that the decisions and cuts that are being made by Trump and Kash Patel are really making us less safe. You know, like you mentioned, almost 2 decades ago, nearly 17 years ago, I took an oath, and I swore an oath to uphold the Constitution as well as protecting the American people. And the steps that Kash Patel and other leaders that are completely unqualified for their roles are taking over the last few months have really made the organization as a whole much more destabilized, where people are fearful for their own safety and security in their own positions and are making the organization, I would say, more difficult to protect the American people every day.
What kind of response was there, for example, to the latest national security lapse was, of course, Signalgate.
Right?
Not only inviting a journalist into your war planning session, but doing it on an app that is not secured to be able to do this kind of stuff. And yet, despite the last decade of Republicans beating their chests over how using an unclassified server or using an unsecured server to discuss national security matters was the gravest threat that we ever faced in the history of this country. Now you've got even Pam Bondi basically announcing that there won't be any investigation, and certainly no punishment for all of this happening.
Yeah, the hypocrisy is really laughable when you think about just the history of our political environment and some of the accusations that have been levied in the past. I will say this, for the last 17 years, I have had access to classified information on a daily basis. And it's not just the information that you have, but it's the individuals that put themselves in harm's way to get that information. There are people in war zones and areas that are really not safe, but they put themselves in that position in order to make Americans more safe and get us that key information. When you use an unclassified or unsecure chat like Signal, you're kind of laughing at those individuals who have done all of that hard work. Also, when you talk about the specific war planning that was happening last week, you have individuals in the armed services whose families won't even mention where they're posted out of their own safety. But we have the highest ranking individuals in our intelligence community putting that stuff on a chat. So we have to do everything possible when we have classified information, not just to protect the information itself, but the sources and the individuals who put themselves in harm's way to get that information and to keep our country safe. Every day when I went into the office, I would lock up my phone in a lead lockbox. I would even take off my Apple Watch. We would do everything possible to ensure that there is just no way that that information could get in the hands of those who shouldn't have it. But what I think is really concerning is the FBI, for like a long held tradition and understanding, is that the FBI investigates whenever we have a classified leak of information. What I think you saw in that hearing just a few weeks ago at the House, when Kash Patel wasn't really asked much about the Signal chat because he wasn't a part of the group, when he was asked questions about investigating it, he wouldn't take a hard stance. So Kash Patel and the FBI really need to do their job and uphold the integrity of this process and do the investigation. In those 17 years that I was with the Bureau, there were, of course, times that I saw that individuals could potentially mishandle information in an inadvertent, accidental way,
Right.
but that was always investigated and handled appropriately, and the appropriate disciplinary actions were always taken. That's what should be happening now. The rules haven't changed. We're just now with the leadership who are choosing to not operate by those rules, and they're treating those who are close to Trump differently, mainly to show that they are loyal to him and not necessarily the American people or the Constitution.
Even if this FBI did opt to investigate things that are happening, would you have faith, based on who the leadership is, that those investigations would be conducted properly, that the outcome would be credible?
The men and women at the FBI that I've had the opportunity and pleasure of working with over the last 17 years are hardworking men and women, analysts, agents, professional staff who come in every day dedicated to ensuring that they are following the rule of law and they are following the appropriate processes in place to protect the American people. What I think is important is to know that those individuals will always follow what is right. Whether leaders or not are supporting them or targeting them for that work is a different story. So I had the opportunity, it was an honor and a privilege to really be able to work on the January 6th investigations. And I've seen now, ever since those investigations were completed and the administration changed, those individuals who worked on those cases have been asked to fill out surveys, identify how they were involved in the investigation, and many of them are really terrified about what the response will be as a result of those efforts and answering those questionnaires. They followed the rule of law, but right now they are being targeted by this current administration for doing their work and upholding the Constitution. So I have full faith in the organization, the men and women there every day to do that investigation accurately and completely, just like they have always done for the entire history of the FBI.
Well, I want to dig into that a little bit because you've got folks who commit the cardinal sin of doing their job in a way that is honest and accurate and with integrity, who don't want to abide by what this administration is doing and leave like you've decided to do after 17 years. Is there some concern that by virtue of you leaving, by virtue of you self-selecting out, that you will be replaced by somebody who won't be who isn't willing to have some adherence to the Constitution or to statute or to law, but rather just blind deference to Donald Trump?
I think that when people leave the FBI, you don't really, the FBI is still with you in a lot of ways. My stepping away from the role that I had as a senior executive is not to leave the mission and the oath that I took behind, but it's to truly honor that oath and that mission in a new way, which is to let the American people know that the actions that are being taken right now by the Trump administration, I mean, let's just look at the economy, the tariffs, the challenges that we're seeing to 401ks. I don't know if you've looked at yours today, but mine is not looking so great.
Oh no, I
Um,
avoid. I actually just pretend like nothing exists right now, and
yeah, yeah,
it's better that
exactly.
way.
And so when you think about it, the president's being so flippant with the economy, which drives up prices for so many people around the country, and everyone's aware of that. The national security apparatus of this country is secretive for a reason, and it's to ensure that we can do the work and protect the American people. So if he's so flippant with the economy, you can imagine that the leaders that he's selected are being flippant with our safety and
Right.
security. So I know that the people at the FBI who are career officials, who are staying, who are going to be there to uphold the law and that oath from internal inside of the organization, they're going to be strong and they're going to do the work correctly. We're going to follow the facts and follow the law. As Chris Wray, a former director until this fall or right around the inauguration, he was Trump appointed. He is someone who always said we had to follow the law and follow the facts. And that is what the FBI has done. I think there's always an opportunity to your question that individuals could come in who are less adherent, but those are not going to be the rank and file, the men and women of the FBI who served the country and to get to a senior position over the course of more than a decade. That could be someone like a political appointee, like a Kash Patel, and for the first time ever, the deputy director being appointed from outside with absolutely zero experience, and Dan Bongino.
John, what was the reaction, for example, when Trump held his speech at the Department of Justice and basically used it to give a wink and a nudge about who he wants to be investigated? He named people like Norm Eisen and Mark Elias, both of whom I interview quite often on my show and who have been prolific in terms of their pushback against the worst excesses of this administration. It was clear what he was trying to do by going to the DOJ and basically spelling out a list of his enemies. How does that kind of thing land with rank and file prosecutors and investigators once they're not, face to face with the president of the United States?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think if you look historically, we've obviously had instances of presidents addressing the Department of Justice before in person. But I think to your point, the tone and the tenor and the words that were used during that address were particularly concerning. You have to remember the FBI in and of its at its basic line is apolitical. It's to find those facts and investigate that evidence and make a determination and to, hold that oath and upholding the Constitution really as a cornerstone of the organization. When you have a president who goes to the Department of Justice, for example, and kind of using your phrase, kind of wink and nod things that he's looking for. It's really concerning, but I think what we can do is we can draw a straight line of that to some of the changes that have been made in the really recent past. So it's been reported a bit, but the domestic terrorism team inside of the FBI, as Chris Wray, again, a Trump appointed director, he identified domestic terrorism in different Senate and House hearings as the number one threat facing Americans. That's your active shooters, your lone wolf terrorists.
Yeah.
Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, under Donald Trump's direction, have actually lessened the personnel size of that team. And they moved it to other threats like cartels and things along the southern border, which I can tell you, as somebody who is a supervisor in our criminal division, we have always fully investigated. So when you look at shrinking the domestic terrorism team, who's responsible for keeping Americans safe and secure, and then on top of that, just hitting Americans with another cut, which is cutting grants for violence prevention. So we're talking about the training that the FBI and other agencies do at your place of work, your place of worship, whether it be a church, a synagogue, a mosque. You are being made less safe by the choices that are being made to shrink that domestic terrorism team, but then you're also not being given the resources needed to really protect yourself when that threat potentially does present itself to you. So that speech was just nothing more than a call to things that are already starting to happen, but they're happening because those political appointees who are in those roles, namely the new director, are making those cuts and making America less safe.
Right, perfectly put. John, what's next for you? Again, almost 2 decades at the FBI.
Yeah, it is a big period of transition. I have to say that I'm really looking forward to using my voice, upholding that mission and that oath in any way that I can to keep America safe and let America know that these challenges are happening in the background. I can't talk about everything that I did at the Bureau, but there were some things that I did that, were particularly impactful. I'm a dad. The ability to investigate child predators is something that is hugely significant and something that I'm really proud of. Working under the Obama administration to remove foreign adversaries from this country, looking at cartels, looking at the fentanyl flow into this country. There's a lot of really great work that I know that I can talk about and make Americans understand not just the importance of the FBI, but why it's so important that Congress acts. We need Democrats, we need Republicans to do their job, to uphold sort of this understanding of what the FBI should be doing and ensure that we are demanding that the FBI senior leadership, mainly Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, are doing their jobs. Congress really needs to act and have some of that oversight.
Perfectly put. Well, appreciate you taking the time today and appreciate you speaking out here. John
Yeah.
Sullivan.
Thank you.